name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. That's better. And welcome to the very end of September. It seems like we were at Labor Day just a little bit ago. And now, suddenly, we are almost to October. I mentioned on the newsletter over the weekend that I was beginning to see the first little peeking leaves of yellow outside in the bushes. And that was a friendly reminder that fall is here, fall is coming. And that was that was just kind of a friend, like I said, a friendly reminder that fall is almost here. It's we're having a lot of fun today. We have a handful of news stories. There's a thread about Charlie Kirk that I didn't read last week when I did my big 45 minutes on Charlie Kirk, and I want to explore that tonight because I think it represents kind of where the mood of the country was a couple weeks ago, and I think it will explain kind of where things are moving forward. And then I'm going into Kamala Harris's book tour, and all the things from that. There have been some interesting videos around. I didn't pull any video for that. I pulled articles, but we might go grab a couple just for fun. And then what else do we have? Oh yes, and then I have a very interesting couple things related to millennials in college and whatnot, because my new book, America's Lost Generation, is out now. I actually just, before this show, got the most wonderful email from David Beckmeyer, who's a friend of the show, and he was commenting on how lovely it was and how well researched it was and all this sort of thing. I just did a live on Substack with him, the shorts of which are on my channel. You can see them right now. And he and I were talking about the issue with Gen Z men, and in the middle of him writing America's Lost Generation, I kind of started slipping stuff in about Gen Z because they were coming of age during the pandemic, so I started talking about how these long-term trends that had started with millennials were affecting the next generation, and so we were having that conversation, was also talking about America's Lost Generation. So it's a very fascinating thing, so we're going to get into all of that. It was a lovely day here, not too hot, not too cold, which is really, really good. I would encourage everyone to go subscribe to the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. And if you want to support this channel and this journalism, please sign up for Cameron Journal Plus at CameronJournal.com/subscribe. It's $5 a month, which is very lovely. And also, on that same page, if you don't want to subscribe, because, another subscription. You can also tip me on coffee. And if you're already on Substack, and you don't want to subscribe to another platform with another, if you're already on Substack, already subscribed on Substack, I also do select stuff on Substack. The weekly newsletter is on there, interviews from the show are on there, the news hour is on there, all this type of thing. So if you're already using Substack, don't want to sign up for something else, and just kind of want to add to your existing subscriptions on Substack, I'm on Substack, CameronJournal.substack.com. And of course, on all your favorite social media. Weirdly enough, y'all have been talkative today. I have talked to probably 5 different listeners today, who are responding to videos, mostly on Facebook, which is really exciting. So thank you, everyone who's writing in and asking questions. I absolutely love when people do that. When I started this show, these 11 years ago, that was something that I always enjoyed, is when people were really engaging and they wrote in and asked me something or said something or had a comment. Even the people that say terrible things about me, and they do all the time, too fat, too gay, too everything. And I'm never good looking to the haters in the comments. I've been called a potato, a spud, Mr. Potato Head was very popular for a long time, Java the Hutt, all this sort of thing. Even with that, I always tell people thank you for increasing my engagement metrics, but I always love when people are engaging, and I love when people really write in and ask questions and we get a real conversation going, because that's what is really, really exciting. And I also did forget who today's interview is. The interview for today is September the 29th Reza Rajabi. He's really cool. He's from Iran, and we talk about everything Iran, which is really awesome. And it's excellent conversation. Um, and it's just really, a really wonderful insight to the politics inside Iran, how Iranians feel about things, and how the relationship with the West. It's always helpful, I find, to understand our relationship and our place in the world. When we're looking at countries like Iran, it's not always just our perspective. They have their own perspective too, informed by their culture, all this type of thing. And I think it's always interesting, um, to hear that in a real material way from someone who knows it, who grew up with it, all this sort of thing. So that's a really wonderful conversation. So that's out now. And without further ado, why don't we get to some headlines? So let me switch to this. And here we are. That's the inside of my YouTube channel. That's not helpful. Let's bounce over here. So, the first, this is kind of America's Lost Generation related. But it says, I really enjoy, this really kind of spoke to me a little bit. It says, the problem with meritocracy in the 1990s and 2000s is that the Ivies filled up with kids getting perfect SAT scores at the same time as cranking out excellent sheep rather than revolutionizers of physics, or at least people who could have seen the 2008 financial crash coming. So what exactly was all that brain power producing for universities' host societies? This weakness in the meritocracy was part why the 2010s alternative was able to gain so much ground so quickly, though it's not like this was likely producing the next Feynman either. And the top comment was also interesting. I do like the Zarathustra account. It says, I'll have to track it down, but there was a brilliant post from a retired Ivy League admissions officer years ago describing a quiet policy shift in the 90s. As DEI priorities took hold, the Ivies deliberately stopped recruiting what they once prized as the oddball misfit genius type, those out of the left field kids, often from working class or Midwestern backgrounds, who might have had stellar test scores, but uneven grades because they spent their time writing novels, building inventions, or obsessing over arcane pursuits. In pruning away that category, we also pruned away a whole strain of raw, unconventional brilliance that we just don't see anywhere anymore. Oh, someone's commenting. Someone's commenting on Twitch. Hello? Yes, hello. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. And so, yes, thank you. Yes, I just started reading. I was in the middle of reading an article, but thank you so much for stopping by. And so that, and it's, the reason I bring this up is because I think there was, because of this, ended up being a lot of sort of downward pressure on young people, to, begin to align themselves with this high level of achievement. And that, I think that ended up being very damaging, not necessarily for elder, even mid-cohort millennials, but late millennials, early Gen Z, I think felt this a great deal. I think also this idea that the oddball misfit genius type, those out of left field kids born from working class Midwestern backgrounds who might have had stellar test scores, but uneven grades because they spent their time writing novels, building inventions, obsessing over arcane pursuits, that's the type of person our society does not have a lot of use for. Here's the other kind of half of this is, as colleges and universities became less about creating an educated populace, and much more about creating great workers for big corporations, this also, I think, produced part of that shift. Because the reality is the oddball misfit genius type does not necessarily make the best corporate drone. And that also has heavily affected how higher ed is perceived. And that's one of the reasons why we don't see those types anymore, is because there's not, as kind of Yarvin said, there's not really a place for them in society. We don't know what to do with them. Corporations don't want them. We can't, academia is underfunded, so there's not really any place for them to go. So we see much less of them. Someone in the chat is asking if I play games or one. I very rarely stream gaming content on Twitch. I do on the occasion, and I play Marvel Rivals. I will play Star Trek Online, and if I ever get it working again, I will stream City Skylines. If you want to watch, honestly, more interesting gaming streaming, I would invite you to follow two people. One is Ninja Q69. He's my co-host on The Living Joke, and the other one is a Grey Crow 01. Those would be the people to follow for gaming content as such. Because I very rarely do this. I right now on Mondays at 7 do the Cameron Journal Newshour, so we're talking about some news. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and thank you for the follow. So as such, getting back to this story, as such, the oddball misfit genius creative type that's gone basically from society. And I would know because sometimes people think that I am that way. And it is true. You spend a lot more time pursuing your artistic pursuits or your inventions or whatever have you, and your grades are not necessarily that great. And you also, there's really kind of nowhere for you to go in society anyway. So a lot of those kids end up dropping out and pursuing stuff or starting their own businesses, or it's a whole other, it's a whole other track or whatever have you. Um, and and this person kind of summarized it very well when they say the whole philosophy of those sheep is to succeed enormously by sticking to the plan. Calling out problems leading up to 2008 was against the plan. In other words, they were not really sheep, but people who knew that they would get what they wanted by being sheep-like. Um, and also this other comment, I don't think perfect SAT scores were the reason great science wasn't getting created. It just wasn't getting financially rewarded. And a lot of people, one of the kind of themes that has come out in recent years is that we need a return to meritocracy. And I remember when Brett Weinstein, one of the Weinstein brothers, was talking about this a few years ago, when I still more actively watch them than I do now, is that we need to bring back the meritocracy and make it so that we create a society where you can succeed, but you have to put in the effort to make it happen, sort of thing. But nothing about you as a person is going to hold you back from doing very well for themselves, and that there's been a call for that, and I don't. That is a solution to the problem, but it's not the only solution to the problem. We also have to be open to a diversity of background, geographically, class, all this type of thing. We also have to be very open to, a diversity of expertise, and not looking for, those kind of sheep-like conformist sort of thing. But the reality is, in any meritocratic system, when you have standards of what you want people to earn in order to do something, which we didn't really have in the 50s and 60s, is that you have to set standards, and when you set those standards, they are by their very nature exclusionary. And because they're exclusionary, you're going to lose people. And if you want to raise up oddball misfit genius types, meritocracy is probably the worst way to do it, because we have this idea of if your work is good enough, then that's all that matters. And there were a lot of millennials, including me, that were told that and was crammed down our throats, and that's not really true. It's not just, do you do good work? Do you do the type of work that people value and hold in high regard? Do you do the type of work that someone's going to pay for? And if the answer to those is no, then meritocracy is not going to get you very far. Whereas in previous systems that emphasized, going into academia, or going into anything else sort of thing, that is that those people had somewhere to go, and whatever they didn't necessarily have to be super profitable, or it didn't have to be popular. And you could have someone worrying about the science of insects, and they might do a great result, or they might not. That was the beauty of Bell Labs. They spent millions on stuff that never went anywhere, but they also invented Wi-Fi, the cell phone towers, all this sort of thing. I mean, they invented a lot of things on the way, but there was also a lot of stuff that went nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And so but the reality is that it costs a lot of money to pay people to invent a bunch of stuff that doesn't work to find one thing that will make you billions. And the ROI is not clear from the beginning. The ROI isn't necessarily obvious from the beginning, but that's what it takes, really, to kind of make it happen. And even dumb stuff like, the original, one of the great things with the MIT labs is one of the buildings they used was basically very cheap, inexpensive construction. And so the scientists could change the walls, change the floors, cut stuff open, all this type of thing. and really do what they wanted to and needed to do in order to create wonderful, amazing sort of things. And that was because the building was kind of cheap and it wasn't that great. But some of the biggest inventions came out of that cheap, crappy building, mostly because they were able to literally change the building to their exact needs, which was really quite amazing. So I wanted to bring this up because this culture and whatnot affected my generation a great deal. And when I talk about that in America's Lost Generation, and I talk a lot about how we got here to today, and I very much I think it's worth reading and understanding if you're kind of frustrated by why things are the way they are. You want to kind of see what the vision of the future is a little bit because of Japan and what has happened. I get into all of that. So if you want to know what happened to millennials, how we got here, and why this sort of lack of meritocracy or this sort of higher ed culture exists, I would highly, highly encourage you to read America's Lost Generation, because I touched on a lot of those points and a lot of these things. So that's why I wanted to start with this thread, is because it was an excellent kind of on-ramp to talking about America's Lost Generation. Let's move on to the Charlie Kirk thread. So, bear in mind, we're going to read this most of the way through. And this was posted right after Charlie Kirk was shot. Now, a lot of people don't know about this woman on the left. She was a Ukrainian woman whose name is in the thread. We'll find out what her name is in a minute. She was shot on a subway the day before Charlie Kirk was shot in Utah. And so, and again, this is the Cameron Journal. We talk about news narratives. We talk about how these narratives start, where people are getting their information from, what filters through, and what people are looking at. Her death on the subway was a big thing in the right-wing news media that it never touched really the left. But in the right wing, it was a huge, huge story. And then Charlie Kirk happens. And so there's this perception that, they're just out here shooting people, sort of thing. And he gets into this a little bit. And so he starts warning, long rant, and we'll begin. My liberal friends are completely oblivious about how radicalizing the last week has been for tens of millions of normal Americans. Zero clue. I'm not talking about people who are online. I mean regular, everyday Americans. Normies. People who scroll through Facebook posts and Instagram reels from the Dutch Bros drive-thru line. Political moderates who have water cooler chats about Mahomes touchdowns and Bon Jovi concerts. Not Twitter threads or Rachel Maddow monologues. Millions of them, tens of millions. They're logging on, they're engaging, and they're furious. And I'll be candid. They blame you guys, they blame the left. Regardless of whether you believe it to be justified, they think you're the bad guys here, and they're reacting accordingly. I can already hear some of you racing towards the comment section to start screeching in moral indignation, so I'm going to be blunt. Shut up and listen to what I'm telling you. Your movement will lose any semblance of relevance if you don't develop some small measure of self-awareness, and absent someone force-feeding you bitter medicine, you guys collectively lack the humility to do this on your own. Here's the facts. Fact 1. Tens of millions of Americans started the week seeing a 23-year-old blonde woman, a young woman in whom virtually every parent watching pictured their own daughter, stabbed in the neck by a career criminal. These people then found out the murderer had been released from jail 14 times over. Fact, 2 days later, tens of millions of Americans watched a video of Charlie Kirk get murdered speaking to college students. Millions of these people knew who Charlie was, millions of them didn't. Upon seeing the video, however, these normal Americans from across the land and across the political spectrum agreed that he was the victim of a terrible, fundamentally unjustifiable crime, and their hearts broke in sympathy for his family. Good people who'd never even heard the name Charlie Kirk before wept. Fact 3. Immediately after seeing the footage of a peaceful young man get shot in the neck, these same people logged onto Facebook and Instagram. Remember, we're talking about regular Americans, not the perpetually online Twitter or Blue Sky users, and saw some of their local nurses, school teachers, college administrators, and retail workers celebrating this horrific crime, not just defending it, but cheering it. These are all facts. You may not like the implications of these facts, and we can certainly debate the underlying causes thereof, but indisputably they are nevertheless factual statements. And this is why I talk about news narratives. We're going to take a break for a moment. This is why I talk about news narratives. What filters through to people, what people see and perceive, especially thanks to social media algorithms, is vitally important. And when you start understanding that public discourse today is not based upon facts or people taking the time to figure out what it is, but understanding that filtering process of what makes it through on social media, as he says here, saw some of their local nurses, school teachers, they log onto Facebook and they saw these videos, all this everything. When you understand that's how people are perceiving the world in these narratives, a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense starts to make sense. And this is why I talk about these news narratives so much. Let's keep going. Here's what it means for you, the Democrats reading this. These normal, middle-of-the-road, non-political citizens just become politically active. They realize that politics cares about them, even if they don't particularly care about politics. After watching Irina Zaratustra and Charlie Kirk both bleed out from the neck, they think their lives and their physical safety of their families, the bedrock of human society, the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, depend on political activation whether they desire it or not. These people are now sprinting, not jogging, not walking, but racing to the right because they blame you guys, us the left, for everything that just happened. When they see footage of DeCarlos Brown stabbing a Ukrainian refugee to death, they don't see just one demon-possessed man. They picture every university administrator, HR bureaucrat, and DEI apparatchik that ever lectured them about systemic racism, the carceral state, or the need to release violent crime suspects without bail in the name of social justice. They then think back to conversations they've had with their cop friends, their buddy from high school who quit the force after getting tired of being called a racist, their friend at the local YMCA who vents about having to release career criminals because Soros-funded prosecutors aren't willing to file charges, and they realize everything the left has told them over the last 5 years has been utter bullshit. And they blame you because even if you count yourself as a moderate Democrat, your party supported the district attorneys, city council members, and mayors that let fictitious concerns about mental health and racial justice supersede very real concerns for their family's safety. That's incorrect, but it's his story, we'll keep going. When these Americans see blood erupt from the side of Charlie Kirk's neck, they don't see just a martyr political activist. They think of every extreme leftist they've ever met who, one, calls anyone to the right of Hillary Clinton a fascist, and two, constantly jokes about punching Nazis and bashing the fash. They realize that they really do exist people who wish to see them dead for their moderately conservative political beliefs, their Christian faith, and even the color of their skin. They ask themselves if the violence visited upon Charlie might one day show up on their own doorstep. And they blame you. Because even if you're just a center-of-the-road liberal, you lack the courage to police your own ranks. You let modern-day Maoist Red Guards run loose across every facet of society, and what started with social media struggle sessions has now turned into 30-06 bullet holes. When these Americans log onto social media and see their neighbors justifying, celebrating, glorifying murder, they realize that some who walk among them are soulless ghouls at best, literally demon-possessed at worst. These people, whether they faithfully attend church every Sunday or only attend with relatives once per year on Christmas Eve, start talking about things like spiritual warfare. They implicitly understand that no normal human casually celebrates the mortal demise of a peaceful person. And they blame you because even if you condemn Charlie Kirk's murder, they probably haven't seen you condemn those in your own movement who cheered it on. They view you as complicit in allowing heartless fellow travelers to celebrate death, and it repulses them. For all those situations, what has your response been? Nothing but bullshit. In response to Irina Zaratustra bleeding out from the floor of a train, you post bullshit statistics about reductions in reported crime when everyone who's ever been to a major urban center in the last decade knows that actual crime has skyrocketed, only for victims not to waste their time reporting it to cops that don't have the manpower to respond and prosecutors that seek to downgrade as many felonies as possible to misdemeanor citations. In response to a 31-year-old man taking a bullet to the neck in front of his family, you post nothing but bullshit whataboutism. What about January 6th? And he gives an answer. What about Mike Lee making a dumb joke on Twitter about some guy masked in Minnesota? What about Paul Pelosi? What about regulations on assault rifles? In response to teachers, healthcare workers, and thousands of other liberals cheering on Charlie's murder, it's nothing more bullshit misdirection. It's not that many people celebrating. Yes, it is. Everyone's seen it on their Facebook and Instagram feeds. I thought you guys didn't support cancel culture. All bullshit, not even smart bullshit, but stale, mid-grade, low IQ bullshit. Ordinary Americans see right through it and they don't like how it smells. You probably don't like hearing this, but you need to hear it. Because I'm right, and as you reflect on this, you know I'm right. The ranks of my political movement gained millions of righteously angry new members this week. We have a mandate to ensure these crimes never happen again, and that's exactly what we're now going to do. If you want to keep a seat at the table as we do so, you better clean house and start policing your own. And I wanted to explore this. This is from Robert Sterling. One, because I think he's correct on much of this. Directionally correct. And I think people kind of forgot that in the aftermath of all of this, there was a lot of people who condemned the shooting. Every mainstream Democrat certainly did. I certainly did in my initial message, and I did again last week, sort of thing. I, again, was barely aware of Charlie Kirk, was happy to see him continue on. I lamented last week, I wish he were counter-programming me tonight. And I don't condone political violence. In January, I warned that we were heading into an age of political violence, and I was very, very worried about that. And I was worried not just for what it would do to the country politically, but I was also worried for what it would do to people, because there are, in it, when you have political violence, there's a body count. And I think he's advocating for something the Democratic Party is maybe coming around to the idea of, but unlikely will not do. And that is, he wants to reject all of the far left, all of the progressives, anyone who's not, basically Republican light, as one might call it. For those that look at what's happening in the world and see fascism and authoritarianism, you can complain, but it shouldn't, you should never, joke about anything violent, all this sort of thing. Although the left's not the one forming militias, but that's a whole other conversation. The militias existed long before this. That's a whole other conversation. When it talks to people talking about and joking about violence, there's lots of opportunities for lots of people to do that. That unfortunately does lead eventually to violence happening. And this isn't even necessarily new. When we had the protests in Charlottesville, that man drove down people with his car. People, there's been different violent acts over the last several years. And these are all terrible things because, one, you cannot have a civilized society with political violence. Can't. It is fundamentally uncivilized. That's the first problem. Second problem is he wants them to completely disassociate themselves with the most... He wants Democrats to completely disassociate themselves from the most fringe end of the party who's talking about these things, advocating for these things, talking about that way. And Democrats will never do that. And I will tell you why. Because that's where the main political energy of the party comes from. It unfortunately very rarely turns into votes, which is a huge problem. And it oftentimes, narratively speaking, is a PR disaster. Let's remember to fund the police. And all the whinging and complaining about mental health and carceral state and all that type of thing, those things are real. Especially if you're poor. Even poor white communities know how, if you're poor, the police, any sort of legal interaction can destroy your whole life. And there are dozens of small legal interactions that happen all the time when one is, and that's a conversation about class, not race. And we're always struggle to have those conversations on class in this country. And so, yes, I mean, as far as how the narrative works, how the narrative goes, and how people are thinking about this, especially, it's been a couple weeks, people have had a time to calm down, all this type of thing. I think directionally he's 110% correct. I do not see the Democratic Party eschewing themselves from these people in any meaningful way, simply because, for better or for worse, a lot of the fringe views and fringe ideas have gone quite mainstream. And the reality is when all you know about Charlie Kirk is a clip you see on social media that the algorithm has presented to you, that becomes your impression of them. And I see this all the time. My most viral videos are never the ones on the important, serious stuff that I would like them to be. It's always on really dumb stuff, and I can only imagine what some people's thoughts must be. Sort of. I mean, this is how it goes. I think directionally he's correct. The country's in a very conservative mood anyway, but I think this has also really been a radicalizing moment and act for a lot of people. I think it's interesting that it's been a little bit, and we have not heard word one from the shooter, Tyler Robinson, who's very much alive. Although I did hear a rumor today about him being Mormon and having some issues with the Mormon church, which I thought was an interesting rumor. I won't get into it because it's a rumor, but an interesting rumor. And so, that was, that was also, an aspect of it as well. We've not really heard anything. It would be interesting to hear more about, why Charlie Kirk sort of thing. And I think, as someone put it, the shooting is mimetic. It's a shit post. It's not ideological, and it's not going to fit an ideological box, which I think is very interesting and probably true. But the reality is, narratively speaking, Robert Sterling is right. The narrative is already, and the Trump administration did an excellent job of saying the narrative. The narrative is he was some crazy leftist who killed Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk's now been officially martyred, and it's going to be an excuse for more crackdowns. It's going to be an excuse. Antifa got branded as a domestic terrorist group, which isn't even an official organization or designation. All this sort of thing. But I think for the average person, they're looking out at all of this and being like, "Yep, it's the liberals that are the problem," and you're going to see a lot more people sort of distancing themselves from liberal views and liberal narratives. Simply because it's become unfashionable, and some would even argue dangerous, to be liberal, sort of thing. And the comment section on this really reflects this. And it, and people, are cheering him on and all this sort of thing. There's no really kind of any pushback from anybody. No one really argues against it. It is, it's a very difficult thing. And I think just because, again, there's not a lot of this probably didn't reach a lot of accounts like this, but I wanted to talk about it. And I should have brought it up last week, but I kind of got into my own thing and thoughts and all this thing. But I really wanted to kind of go through this and bring it up because I think it's a gateway. It is a lens into what will come in the coming weeks and months as we begin to move on from this moment and through this moment and where people are emotionally. The emotional response to Charlie Kirk was visceral, as it should be. It was a very terrible thing. And I will always say it was a terrible thing. Again, I didn't have any hate for the man at all. I vaguely knew of him, I kind of knew what he did, and I was happy for him to continue on doing it. I first came across him about Turning Point USA back in the day. Someone took issue with it. They said that he spent most of his time on political activism, and I said, well, he spent half of his life, his time on Earth doing it. And Charlie Kirk said a lot of terrible things. Just because those things are true does not mean someone deserves to be shot in the neck for it. Quite frankly, I don't think that Tyler Robinson is a terrible leftist. We'll find out how much of a terrible leftist he is. I don't think he's a terrible leftist. But here's the thing, is this is going to be a situation where it may be that I am correct, but it won't matter because the narrative has already been set. And when it comes to the narrative and how people perceive this situation, Robert Sterling is absolutely correct. However, his solution, his non-solution, is to, quote unquote, clean house and start policing our own. And that's not going to work. And that's not going to happen. So my guess is that, any sort of liberal person politically in this country is going to continue to be marginalized. Today, I just saw a map in Missouri where they reduced their congressional seats down to just one, which is basically the city of St. Louis. And I retweeted and I said, yeah, they're locking the other party out of power structurally. And it will be decades, years up to decades, that it ever gets fixed. And it may never be, sort of thing. Other than to simply, find the least red districts and try to win people over. But it's structurally speaking, there's going to be a desire in every way possible to basically lock Democrats out of power. And we've seen this playbook already in places like Wisconsin, where thanks to redistricting, Democrats at the state level are locked out of power. Numerically, they cannot get a majority in the Wisconsin state legislature. North Carolina is pretty close to that already, and they're about to finish the job. This is what's going to be happening moving forward, is Democrats are going to be, not even just politically, structurally, mathematically, the way the system works will make sure Democrats don't win because of everything we're saying. anyone with a liberal idea is going to be marginalized in this country. And I think it is because I'm not happy about this, obviously, but it says if you want to keep a seat at the table as we do so, you better clean house and place your own. That's not going to happen. And so because of that, this structural lockout, which is already happening, already in place, and indeed is emboldened by this, is going to continue. And that means, minority party for a long time. I had lamented after the election last year, and we're going to talk about the precinct by precinct data here in a moment, is that you have this kind of, situation where after the loss I said, this is not just a rejection of liberalism. This is a full surrender and retreat. This is a complete, break sort of thing. And things keep happening that make that break worse, wider, more difficult, and more profound. And that is a very, and even here when he's talking about, people talking about Paul Pelosi or gun regulations or Mike Lee or January 6th, all this type of thing, all of those retorts are all marginalized. It's like, Dems at lawfare, again, Paul who, all this sort of, any of the standard responses, he again summarizes at the end, stale, mid-grade, low IQ bullshit. So there's nothing the left can do. We're at fault. We're the ones who are wrong. Nothing will change that narrative. And certainly no efforts being made by the DNC or anyone else to change the narrative, but nothing can really change the narrative. And I think Robert's right. They need someone to blame. It's us. It's that simple. And many other things will follow that will keep reinforcing this narrative. And it's not a fun time to be a left-leaning, person in this country. It's certainly not fun to be doing this job from the left right now. And it's a struggle. It was a struggle tonight for me to come here and do this. And it's a struggle to continue to want to do this given where the country is going. But I'm also buoyed by people's wonderful comments and things they write in and say. It encourages me to keep going in a time when my mental health is not in necessarily a place to do it. So, anyway, let's move on from this. In related news, as you know, not that we're going to dig into the story, although I might in the newsletter on Saturday. Last week, RFK announced that they were announcing that Tylenol taken during pregnancy is a leading cause of autism. And there's been a lot of other changes within Health and Human Services and within the CDC that have changed vaccine recommendations. They're changing vaccine recommendations for children under 4 years old. A lot of changes about our health and how the federal government regulates and promotes our health at the federal level. As a result of that, some states have banded together to join in their own regional public health coalitions. This sort of thing started during the pandemic, where during 2020, when the Trump administration wasn't really taking the pandemic seriously, different parts of the country decided to form their own coalitions and do their own thing. This is an example of these regional public health coalitions. So you have the Northeast Public Health Cooperative, which includes New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, interestingly, no Vermont and New Hampshire, but also Maine. And then on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington. And it says the collaborative will issue their own vaccine recommendations and coordinate public health records. And it was announced by Kathy Hochul and other people along the way. It does say that apparently Vermont has joined as part of the Northeast Public Health Collaborative, so this map's a little bit incorrect. We'll add in Vermont right there as well along the way. So I guess here's the updated map. So no New Hampshire, but we do have Vermont, so that's working well there. And it says that I just want to acknowledge that Delaware previously said they would join the Northeast Public Health Collaborative, and the New York Times mentioned Maryland in their story, so both states are likely part, but waiting for an official follow-up announcements. They weren't in today's press release. So it may even go so far south as Maryland and Delaware, which is right there. So it's a very, I mention this story only to say that as a reaction to the federal government taking a step back, states will continue to step forward. Now, if you're a big federalism person, this is great news for you. If you're not such a big federalism person, and I tend not to be, I think federalism was a double-edged sword. Um, then this is a symbol of breakdown. This is a symbol of we're not so united. We United States now, are we? Um, and I it's moments like these where I'm reminded of what I tell Europeans when they ask, what is wrong with your country? Why is it not being managed? I said, your country is a top-down structure. I said, our country, we are 50 somewhat independent Republicans who are roommates. And sometimes we're all in agreement, and sometimes we're not so in agreement, and sometimes we go off and do our own thing. And this is an example of certain groups of the 50 roommates, which includes Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, all this sort of thing, deciding to kind of go do their own health thing that doesn't include the other roommates because so it's a tough thing. It's a very tough thing. But yeah, big day for federalism on the health front anyway. And the states deciding to go their own path rather than always answering to Washington, D.C. So yeah, so I also wanted to, a Vote Hub released the first precinct by precinct map of the 2024 election. Now, obviously, why did it take so long? This data poll is crazy. The one that I thought was most interesting was looking at Alaska. If I were Democrats, I'd be kind of like, how do we turn this into some senators, a governorship, and maybe and get the House reps? I think you have so much blue. That precinct only has 8 people living in it for a total of 18. Huh. That's how rural Alaska is. But I mean, that's central Alaska. There's nothing there. There's 8 people. They probably all voted in a small cafe. And so, I know, some Alaska's, some of these have very few votes. But just as there are very few people in some of these places. But looking at the precinct by precinct data, you kind of see, why President Trump really put it over the line when you look at, how much red there is, how much deep red there is, especially when what I call the big L, starting with Louisiana and going straight up the Midwest. And looking even on the East Coast, and people were digging into these at the level. You look at like Staten Island, that's Long Island. But you look at some of these places, and you kind of start to see where President Trump really just cleaned up Philadelphia suburbs, here in Delaware, parts of, even in Northern Virginia, West Virginia, deep red West Virginia. Yeah, and you look at a lot of places, and a lot of the blue dots are literally towns and cities, except for some parts here in the Mid-South. But a lot of your blue dots are, I'm surprised they didn't include the data for South Florida. A lot of the blue is cities, although not always quite true in Arizona and New Mexico, but like Denver, that's Denver metro area. So, yeah, all these, that's actually was my parents' precinct before they moved. But you get in Denver, Fort Collins, Greeley, obviously, a handful of people. So is there even a blue? Yeah, yes, the university. Yeah. Blue. We have a handful of blue voters in what's otherwise deep red Weld County. It is very interesting sort of data and things, for what there is, but when you look at it, precinct by precinct in the big map, you really see how President Trump put it over the line, for 312 over 226 in electoral votes. But even also looking at vote totals, you have a nice 2 million vote gap, that amounted to about 1.5%. And you really see, like I said, here in the Midwest, in the South, even out West, where, that's where they picked up a lot of votes. And some of them, even at the precinct level, are quite close, especially in some swing states and everything. But it's like, he just won everywhere. And when you look at it, even precinct by precinct, he won everywhere, Even, even when you add in Alaska, Hawaii was already very blue. But I mean, even with Alaska and everything, it's like, yeah, he won fucking everywhere. And it shows, sort of thing. But so I would encourage you, if you want to check this out, go to votehub.com/2024 map. And take a look at it all. And I was looking at different parts of the country where I've lived and kind of looking at how people voted in different ways and all this sort of thing. And yeah, if you check out your own area, is a lot of fun, for kind of precinct by precinct level. But yeah, a lot of red, a lot of red. And even within cities, looking at the vote totals. And it's just, again, if you're an election data nerd, it's very interesting. But yeah, so go check that out. Tonight I'm going to close on Kamala Harris's new book tour. She has been out and about. She was speaking at the Congressional Black Caucus this weekend in a lovely purple sequin gown. And Democrats are unhappy. And I mentioned this in the newsletter on Saturday. I did a piece called Meditations on Kamala Harris's book tour. And she is pointing fingers and naming names. I'm talking Joe Biden, the Obamas, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. Everybody has gotten something out of Kamala Harris's book. And so Politico talks about it here. Kamala Harris's media blitz is doing little to temper the frustration bubbling among Democrats over her retelling of the 2024 election. Over the last 24 hours, the former vice president insisted she isn't burning bridges in her own party, rejected the idea that her infamous interview on The View tipped the 2024 election, and didn't roll out another run for political office. Quote, in an era where Democrats need all hands on deck in the fight to protect the country and the Constitution from the lawlessness of the Trump administration, she had a real opportunity to be a critical voice in the resistance, said Michael Hardaway, a Democratic strategist who served as a senior advisor to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Quote, this book seems to be unhelpful and divisive in a way that makes it hard for her to be the face of the party as we look to the future. And I disagree. I said this in the newsletter on Saturday. I think this is what the Democratic Party needs right now. I think it needs someone, an insider with a lot of pull who literally last year was almost president, to come along and say, y'all, we got some issues. Let's talk about those. And here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this is what needs to happen. I mean, so it was like, okay, so she's not going around and making everyone feel good. Don't. There's no reason to feel good. And if you want to know why not to feel good, go back 20 minutes in this broadcast and listen to what I'm talking about Charlie Kirk. Like, there's no reason to feel good right now. We're on the ropes. Let's continue. More than 6 months after her losing election, with Harris now back in the spotlight, her book, 107 Days, has reopened wounds in a party still divided over who or what is primarily to blame for their sweeping losses in President Donald Trump's return to the White House. Harris, for her part, argued on ABC's The View on Tuesday that though there were many factors, ultimately we just didn't have enough time. It's not the first time a political memoir has prompted eye rolls. Hillary Clinton's book tour in 2017 triggered a collective groan among infuriated Democrats, including one top donor who told Politico at the time, quote, she should just zip it, unquote. Biden, struggling to sell his post-presidency legacy, is expected to release his own White House memoir. Democrats privately worry the parade of scab-picking, backward-looking books isn't helping the party move on, especially as its brand sinks to new lows in public polling. At a time when people are looking for a vision and leadership and want to see leaders rise to the level of threat facing the country, it's pretty crazy she chose to write a gossip book that prioritizes the pettiness of her politics, said an advisor to a potential 2028 candidate granted anonymity to discuss the issue candidly. It's embarrassing for her and for all Democrats, considering she was the leader of the party less than a year ago. During her interviews this week, Harris clarified some of her more candid assessments from her book, including her decision that it would be too risky, as she wrote, to put former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a gay man and her preferred running mate, on a ticket headed by a black woman married to a Jewish man. It wasn't about any prejudice on my part, but we had such a short period of time and the stakes were so high. Harris told MSNBC's Rachel Maddow on Monday night. I think America is and will be ready for that, but when I had to make that decision with 2 weeks to go, maybe I was being too cautious, but that's the decision I made. Buttigieg told Politico last week that he found Harris's comments surprising and believes in giving Americans more credit. On Biden, Harris told co-host of The View on Tuesday that she has, quote, a good relationship, unquote, with the former president, who she praised as a highly capable president who accomplished great things. She described her own refusal to criticize Biden in a now infamous appearance on the same show in October 2024 as symbolic of the issue. I'm a loyal person, and I didn't fully appreciate how much people wanted to know there was a difference between me and President Biden, she said. I thought it was obvious, and I didn't want to offer a difference in a way that would be received or suggested to be criticism. In an interview with ABC's Good Morning America on Tuesday, Harris said she regretted not confronting Biden over his decision to run for re-election, calling it reckless. Harris made a similar assessment in her book when she said the stakes were simply too high and it should have been more than a personal decision for Biden. When asked about her own future political ambitions, the former vice president demurred. "I'm not focused on that right now. I'm really not." A member of Harris's inner circle told Politico last week that her book was not intended as a burn the boats exit from politics. For some Democrats outside of Harris's orbit, the book suggested otherwise. "If this was intended as a campaign launch, I don't think it got off the pad," said David Axelrod, a longtime senior advisor to former President Barack Obama. Well, David Axelrod can go suck it. If it was intended as a catharsis, only she can know if it was successful. Well, David Axelrod can go suck it. I'll say that, I have no concern with what he has to say. A former Biden and Harris campaign staffer, granted anonymity to discuss the issue candidly, said that if voters, like those watching a round of media interviews this week, start seeing her as a sore loser, that's the risk for her politically. Some recent public polling found the former vice president's favorability rating has dropped since October of 2024. Harris is not without supporters. Mike Nellis, a Democratic strategist who worked with Harris in her 2020 presidential campaign, praised Harris for her speaking her truth, even though that truth is uncomfortable for people. "I think if we had more difficult conversations as a party over the last couple of years," he said, "we would have been in a much stronger position to win the election last year." Thank you. Someone understands. No, this needs to happen. Names and fingers need to be pointed. The lack of Obama's early support, Nancy Pelosi being like, we need to have a process, all this type of thing. Someone needs to come out and say, it's not good. This isn't working. And I think she's the right person to do it. Someone's finally saying it. No one listens to me. So glad that someone who they will pay attention to is saying it, because the present is untenable. And I think her finally being like, no, we shouldn't let Biden run. And, I kind of got screwed up. Finally, someone is saying it. And I kind of laugh because the New York Times did a whole article about this. And especially how the Biden White House didn't even support her, particularly this portion that said, she said, quote, "During all those months of growing panic, should I have told Joe to not consider running? Perhaps," she wrote in an excerpt. But the American people had chosen him before in the same matchup. Maybe he was right to believe they would do so again. The former president described herself as in the worst position to make the case that he should drop out of the 2024 race because she believed Mr. Biden would view such entreaty as disloyal. At the time, she and others extended grace in allowing Mr. Biden and Jill Biden, the First Lady, to make the decision on their own. But now, she wrote, she's come to believe it was a mistake not to speak up. And it also kind of comes down here and says that she denied she believed he was incapacitated. "If I believed that, I would have said so," she added. "As loyal as I am to President Biden, I am more loyal to my country." Ms. Harris also wrote about feeling undermined by unspecified members of Mr. Biden's team, but didn't take aim at the former president himself, however. In recalling an 11-minute speech he made from the Oval Office, she wrote that her staff noted she was mentioned only fleetingly in the 8th minute. "And that was it. I am a loyal person." She lamented that throughout her time in office, Mr. Biden's team didn't defend her against right-wing attacks about her competence, including a drumbeat of conservative commentary about her laugh, nor pushback on media stories that she said reported unfair or inaccurate accounts. She also accused his White House aides of helping fuel negative narratives. "And when the stories were unfair or inaccurate, the president's inner circle seemed fine with it," she wrote. "Indeed, it seemed as if they decided I should be knocked down a little bit more." She specifically cited stories about high staff turnover in her office and the chaotic nature of her first year as vice president, and how the White House communications team didn't help her effectively push back against Republicans' mischaracterization of her role as border czar, a role that Mr. Biden assigned her. The former vice president does not name those she felt wronged her, but she was clear that she believed many in Biden's inner circle were not invested in her success. Their thinking was zero-sum. If she's shining, he's dimmed. Ms. Harris wrote, "None of them grasped that if I did well, he did well, that given the concerns about his age, my visible success as his vice president was vital. It would serve as a testament to his judgment in choosing me and reassurance that if something happened, the country was in good hands. My success was important for him. His team didn't get it." Kelly Scully, a Biden spokeswoman, declined to comment. I'm sure she did. I did see this story about Harris saying we're dealing with a communist dictator. And she, and it's, and it was a very interesting kind of comment that she made, a little bit offhand. And that was, it was an interesting sort of thing. This is former Vice President Kamala Harris bashed President Trump on Monday night, saying the United States is dealing with a communist dictator in the White House. Harris wrote in her memoir 107 Days, which was released Tuesday, that she predicted how Trump would act in a second term, but she didn't expect the level of capitulation from the private sector towards him. She was pressed on MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show about why she didn't anticipate such action, and responded that she believed titans of industry would be guardrails for our democracy. And one by one, they have been silent, they have been feckless, Harris said. It's not like they're going to lose their yacht or their house in the Hamptons. Democracy sustains capitalism. Capitalism thrives in a democracy. And right now we're dealing with, as I called him at my speech on the Ellipse, a tyrant, she said, referencing a rally last year on the White House Ellipse in Washington. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with now in Donald Trump. And these titans of industry are not speaking up. I like this for her. Weirdly enough, I like this for her. And I'll kind of tell you why. I like this for her because I think weirdly a lot of mainstream Democrats want someone with teeth to say crazy things right now and be entertaining, and she's doing that. And I also think she's causing the party to reflect on what went wrong and all the ways in which them not bolstering her and seeing to her success is she's linking that to the failure in 2024 and also saying the party has some problems. I think this is good and healthy. I'm sorry, David Axelrod, go suck it. This is healthy. This is good. We need reform at the deepest levels of the party, which is kind of the theme tonight. No, this is very much necessary. And those who are claiming that it isn't, it's not, there's a problem, there's this, the other thing, again, shut the hell up. This is good. This is necessary. Obviously, I'm sure she said some things in the book that I wouldn't agree with or not endorse, so don't pretend this is a blanket endorsement for everything on her book that she's talking about. I'm sure I could find something to disagree with. I haven't finished reading it yet. I'm sure I could find something. But for the way this narrative is showing out, this is needed and very necessary. For the way this is moving through the media ecosystem, this is good and necessary, and I think very important. And I for one appreciate it. So, that's the hour, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. You can find me online at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter, at Cameron Journal on TikTok, and also on LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/subscribe. You can see me on Substack, CameronJournal.substack.com, and you can also find me on Facebook. Just look up my name, Cameron Lee Cowan, or it's Facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan if you want to put in that much work. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. I'll be back next week, Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, on all your favorite streaming platforms, YouTube, Twitch, blah, blah, blah. Don't forget to join us for The Living Joke, Wednesday at 4. Will and Connor will be here, and we'll talk about something. We haven't really worked out this week's show yet. We'll talk about something. Don't make sure to subscribe to the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. Oh, thank you to everyone who went and watched me at Unleashed AI Summit and got a bunch of free gifts and things. I saw a lot of you were clicking and getting my free gifts. If you want to get a hold of some of the free gifts that I gave to the Unleashed Summit AI people, now that that event is over, shoot me an email at CameronJournal.com. And I will send you the link, which means if you're listening this long and paying this much attention and you email in, I know that you will have seen this show. So, otherwise, my name is Cameron. I'll see you next Monday. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.